The Omega lived as human for a decade, until the ruthless Alpha King marked the fated bond. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Emily Carter. For 10 years, Emily Carter lived by rules no one else could see, rules written into her bones long before she ever learned how to pretend she was human, rules that said keep your head down, keep your distance, and never let anyone get close enough to notice what you are. North Hollow was the kind of small American town where people smiled politely, measured life in miles and minutes, and believed the forest at the edge of town was just trees and shadows, nothing more. Emily made sure she fit perfectly into that picture. She worked quiet shifts, paid her rent on time, and walked home the same half-mile every evening, always before sunset, always alone. No one questioned her routines, and that was the point. The longer she lived like this, the more she convinced herself it could last forever, that the part of her she kept locked away would eventually fade into nothing. But the truth was, pretending came with a cost. Every full moon, every change in the air, her body reminded her of the lie she was living. She learned to breathe through it, to anchor herself to ordinary things like the hum of her refrigerator or the ticking of the clock on her wall, counting seconds until the feeling passed. She never complained. She never explained. Survival meant silence. North Hollow never noticed her, and Emily thought that was safety. Then the town began to change. It started with rumors whispered over coffee, about strangers passing through, about a presence that felt heavier than weather, heavier than coincidence. Emily felt it before she heard it. The air itself seemed sharper, as if the world had tilted a single degree off balance. She avoided Main Street, took longer routes home, and ignored the way her instincts kept pulling her. Attention toward the forest she'd spent a decade pretending didn't matter. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it would pass. It didn't. On an ordinary afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the pavement and the town moved at its usual slow pace, Emily felt something unmistakable shift inside her, a pressure she hadn't felt in years, as if something ancient had opened its eyes and realized it was no longer alone. Somewhere nearby, someone powerful had arrived, someone who didn't belong to the human rhythm of North Hollow, someone whose presence cut straight through the careful life she had built. Emily didn't know his name yet. She didn't know he was an Alpha King known for ruthless control and unbreakable will. She only knew that for the first time in 10 years, hiding felt fragile, and the future she'd been clinging to suddenly felt like glass, already cracking under the weight of fate. Emily Carter learned early that blending in required discipline, and discipline meant controlling every small reaction that could betray her. The morning after the strange shift in the air, she moved through North Hollow with deliberate calm, counting her steps, measuring her breath, reminding herself that nothing had truly changed. The town still smelled like brewed coffee and pine sap. The road still stretched in familiar lines measured in miles she could walk with her eyes closed, and people still nodded politely without looking too closely. That should have been enough. It had always been enough before. Yet beneath the surface of routine, something restless stirred, a quiet tension pulling at her awareness no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She felt it while standing in line at the grocery store, while reaching for a carton of milk, while handing over exact change without meeting the cashier's eyes. Her senses felt sharper, as if the world had been turned up a notch without her permission. Sounds lingered longer, scents carried farther, and emotions brushed against her thoughts in ways that made it harder to keep her carefully practiced distance. Emily told herself it was anxiety, the cost of living alone too long, the price of a decade spent pretending she was something she was not. She repeated the lie until it almost sounded true. By afternoon, clouds rolled in low and heavy, and the forest at the edge of town seemed closer than it ever had before, its shadow stretching across streets that once felt safe. Emily avoided looking in that direction, even when a subtle pull tugged at her chest, urging her to pay attention. She had spent 10 years teaching herself not to listen to instincts that could ruin everything. Instincts had no place in a human life. As evening approached, She left work early, choosing the longer route home, adding an extra mile just to stay away from the main road where unfamiliar vehicles had begun to appear. She told herself she was being careful, not afraid. Fear was loud. This was quiet, controlled, necessary. When she reached her apartment, she locked the door, drew the curtains, and leaned her forehead against the cool wood for a moment longer than usual. The sense of being watched lingered, not in a threatening way, but with the weight of attention that felt deliberate and focused. It unsettled her more than open danger ever could. Emily moved through her small space with practiced motions, setting water to boil, straightening items that did not need to be straightened, grounding herself in the ordinary. She measured time by the clock on the wall, noting minutes pass like markers on a road she had walked for years. But when the first star appeared beyond the window, her body reacted before her mind could stop it. A faint warmth spread beneath her skin, subtle but unmistakable, like a memory waking up. She pressed her palms together, steadying herself, reminding her reflection in the dark glass that she was safe, that she was alone, that no one knew who she really was. Somewhere beyond the town limits, something answered that warmth, distant but aware, as if recognizing a signal long denied. Emily stepped back from the window, heart steady but heavy, knowing that whatever had arrived in North Hollow was not passing through quietly. For the first time since she chose this life, she wondered whether hiding had been protection or merely a delay, and whether the rules she had lived by for 10 years were about to be tested by a fate that no longer intended to wait. The next morning arrived with an unnatural stillness that Emily Carter noticed the moment she stepped outside, as if North Hollow itself was holding its breath. The air felt heavier, charged in a way she could not explain, and even the distant traffic on the highway 2 miles away sounded muted, like it was being absorbed by the trees. She kept her gaze forward as she walked, reminding herself that she had survived worse than unease and uncertainty, reminding herself that she had built this life brick by brick and would not let a feeling tear it down. Yet as she reached the edge of town, she saw them. Unfamiliar vehicles parked near the old ranger station by the forest, dark and polished, standing out sharply against the faded paint and cracked pavement of a place long ignored. They did not belong here. Emily knew it with a certainty that tightened her chest. She slowed her pace, choosing a different sidewalk, but the sense of attention returned, precise and deliberate, as though someone had noticed her without needing to see her face. At the ranger station, a small group had gathered, locals pretending to mind their own business while curiosity pulled their eyes toward the strangers who moved with quiet authority. Among them stood a man who did not need to raise his voice to command space, a man whose presence shifted the balance of the world around him without effort. Alpha King Dominic Blackwood did not look rushed or uncertain as he stepped onto the gravel, his posture relaxed but alert, like someone accustomed to being obeyed without asking. He wore simple clothing that concealed nothing of the confidence beneath it, and when he looked toward the forest, it was with the calm certainty of someone who already knew what he would find. Emily felt him before she truly saw him. A subtle pull brushed against her awareness, steady and undeniable, making her breath catch despite her careful control. She turned away immediately, focusing on the rhythm of her steps, but it was too late. Something deep inside her had already reacted, responding to a presence she had spent a decade avoiding. Dominic's attention shifted, slow and deliberate, sweeping across the street with an intensity that had nothing to do with suspicion and everything to do with recognition. He paused, just for a moment, as if listening to something only he could hear, then continued forward, his expression unchanged but his focus sharpened. Emily reached her building faster than usual, locking the door behind her with hands steadier than she felt. Inside, she pressed her back to the wall, heart beating in a controlled rhythm that did nothing to quiet the awareness humming beneath her skin. She did not know his name yet, only that he was dangerous in the way inevitability was dangerous, not loud or cruel, but absolute. Across town, Dominic Blackwood listened to the subtle currents of the place, noting the way the forest leaned toward the human streets, the way something hidden resisted and responded at the same time. North Hollow had been chosen for a reason, and he trusted instinct more than rumor. There was an Omega here who had learned how to disappear, and disappearing never erased truth. It only delayed it. As the day unfolded, Dominic gave quiet instructions, his voice calm, his movements unhurried, already certain that time was working in his favor. Emily, meanwhile, went about her evening routine with rigid discipline, cooking dinner, washing dishes, watching the sky darken beyond the window, telling herself that coincidence did not mean destiny. Yet when the moon began its slow rise, she felt the pull again, stronger now, a silent conversation between something she had hidden and something that had finally arrived to answer it. She did not know that the Alpha King had already marked this town as more than a stop on his path, only that the fragile balance she relied on was shifting, and that whatever came next would not be as easy to outrun as the past. Emily Carter tried to convince herself that proximity did not equal discovery, that simply sharing the same small town with someone powerful did not mean he could see through 10 years of careful restraint. But the lie grew thinner with every passing hour. By the fourth day of Dominic Blackwood's presence in North Hollow, the town had adjusted around him like water around a stone, conversations lowering when he passed, curiosity giving way to quiet respect. Emily adjusted too, altering routines by minutes instead of miles now, choosing different aisles, different times, different paths that still led where they always had. It should have worked. It always had before. The first real mistake came in the most ordinary place imaginable, the small public library near the center of town where Emily had gone for years because it was quiet and predictable and safe. She stepped inside just after noon, the bell over the door chiming softly, and felt the shift. Immediately, that subtle tightening beneath her skin that warned her too late. Dominic stood near the back shelves, one hand resting on a book he did not appear to be reading, his attention fixed somewhere far deeper than printed pages. He did not turn when she entered, did not need to. Emily froze for half a heartbeat, then forced herself to move, reminding her body that she was human, that she belonged here. That panic was louder than truth. She walked past him, feeling the space between them compress in a way that made her pulse quicken, aware of his presence like a low-frequency hum she could not block out. Dominic finally looked up, his gaze catching hers without surprise, as if he had expected this moment, as if he had been waiting for the confirmation he now received. The look was not aggressive or threatening. It was focused, thoughtful, unmistakably aware. Emily felt something inside her react despite every rule she had lived by, a quiet, answering recognition that sent warmth spreading through her chest before she could stop it. She broke eye contact immediately, breath steady but shallow, and continued down the aisle, pretending to browse while her thoughts raced. Dominic did not follow. He did not speak. He simply watched, his attention settling on her like weight, patient and unyielding. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing more than two strangers sharing a moment in a public space. To Emily, it felt like standing too close to the edge of something she could not afford to fall into. She checked out her book quickly and left without looking back, only allowing herself to breathe fully once she was outside, sunlight grounding her in the familiar. Across the street, Dominic stepped out moments later, his expression unchanged but his focus narrowed, the faintest hint of satisfaction stirring beneath his calm exterior. He did not chase answers. He observed reactions. The way her posture shifted, the way her eyes avoided his after that first instant, the way the air itself seemed to respond when she moved past him. These were not the behaviors of a human unaware of deeper currents. That night, Emily paced her apartment, the encounter replaying in her mind despite her efforts to let it fade. She told herself it had been nothing, that strangers looked at each other every day without consequence. But her body did not agree. The warmth returned, stronger now, paired with an awareness that felt like being listened to from far away. She pressed her palms against the window glass, staring out at the darkened town, realizing with a sudden clarity that this was no longer about hiding from the world. It was about hiding from someone who had already begun to see her. Somewhere beyond the buildings, Dominic stood at the edge of the forest, breathing in the night air, certain now that North Hollow held exactly what he had come for. The Omega did not know it yet, but the first line between them had been drawn, thin and invisible, and once drawn, such lines were never meant to remain untested. Emily Carter stopped pretending that control was effortless the moment her body began to betray her in small, undeniable ways. It was never dramatic, never obvious enough for anyone else to notice. But she felt it constantly now, a low hum beneath her skin that made ordinary moments feel charged with meaning. The mornings grew harder. She woke before her alarm, heart steady but alert, aware of the space beyond her walls as if distance itself had thinned. She drank coffee she barely tasted, stared at the clock as minutes passed too slowly, and reminded herself that discipline had kept her safe for a decade. Discipline would keep her safe now. But the town no longer felt neutral. North Hollow seemed to lean toward something it could not see. Conversations drifting toward the forest, people mentioning the newcomer with a mix of caution and fascination. Dominic Blackwood's presence was never loud, yet it anchored the atmosphere wherever he went. Emily felt it when she passed the diner and sensed him inside without seeing him, felt it when she crossed the parking lot at work and noticed the air shift just enough to make her pause. Each time, she forced herself forward, refusing to react, refusing to acknowledge the pull that grew stronger by the day. The problem was not that he watched her. The problem was that her instincts answered. One evening, as clouds gathered thick and low, Emily misjudged the timing of her walk home. The sky darkened faster than expected, the scent of rain heavy in the air, and with it came a wave of sensation she had not felt in years. Her breath caught as warmth spread through her chest, subtle but insistent, making her slow despite herself. She ducked into a quiet side street, pressing her back against a brick wall, focusing on the feel of solid ground beneath her feet. She counted, grounding herself in numbers and distance, reminding herself she was still here, still hidden, still in control. But somewhere nearby, that warmth was answered. Dominic felt it the instant it surfaced, not as a threat, but as confirmation. He had been patient, observing from a distance, allowing the Omega space to reveal herself without pressure. Now the air itself spoke, carrying a trace of something suppressed too long. He did not approach her directly. He turned instead, altering his path just enough to pass within a block, close enough to listen without intruding. Emily sensed him anyway. Her head lifted, gaze sweeping the street without seeing him, her body reacting before her mind could intervene. She steadied herself and continued walking, forcing her pace to remain even, every step a declaration of resistance. By the time she reached her apartment, rain had begun to fall, soft and steady, masking the lingering awareness with sound. She locked the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath she had been holding all day. This was becoming dangerous, not because he was cruel or reckless, but because he was calm. Calm meant certainty, and certainty did not give up. Across town, Dominic stood beneath the shelter of an awning, watching rain blur the streetlights, considering what he had felt. The Omega was strong in a way she did not yet understand, her restraint impressive, her resistance earned. He respected that. He also knew resistance had limits. Fate was not a force that could be ignored forever. As night settled over North Hollow, Emily sat by her window, listening to rain against glass, realizing that the life she had built on silence was being tested by something that did not need words. The bond had not been claimed. Nothing irreversible had happened. Yet the space between hiding and being found was narrowing, and both of them knew it. Emily closed her eyes, aware now that this was no longer just about staying human. It was about whether she could continue denying a truth that had begun to wake, and whether the Alpha King who had found her would wait much longer for her to stop running. By the 6th day, the quiet hunt had become unmistakable, not in action but in intention, and Emily Carter felt the shift as clearly as a change in weather. Dominic Blackwood did not pursue her openly, did not corner or confront, yet his awareness seemed to trace the outline of her days with unsettling precision. When she changed her routine, he adjusted his presence. When she avoided familiar places, he appeared near the edges instead, never too close, never absent. It was not pressure. It was patience. Emily recognized it because she had practiced the same discipline for 10 years. She knew what it meant to wait without revealing your hand. The difference was that her waiting had always been about survival, while his carried the weight of certainty. She felt it most strongly at night, when the town grew quiet and the forest breathed closer, when distance no longer protected her thoughts. The warmth beneath her skin returned more often now, lingering longer, responding to something that felt less like intrusion and more like invitation. She resisted instinctively, grounding herself in human habits, counting steps, measuring time, focusing on the sound of her own breathing. But resistance no longer brought relief. It only sharpened the awareness that she was being seen without being touched. Dominic spent those days listening rather than searching, noting how the Omega moved through the world, how she never lingered, how she avoided crowds without fear, how her attention shifted before events occurred, not after. These were not learned behaviors. They were adaptations. He watched from places where observation looked like coincidence, outside the grocery store, near the edge of the park, along roads that curved toward the forest. Each time, the air responded to her presence in subtle ways, enough to confirm what he already knew. She was not hiding out of ignorance. She was hiding out of choice. On the seventh evening, the sky cleared suddenly, stars sharp against the dark, and Emily felt the pull stronger than ever before. She left her apartment with the intent to walk, not to escape, but to think, her feet carrying her toward the boundary she had avoided for years. The forest edge greeted her with familiar stillness, a line she had not crossed since she chose to live as human. She stopped several yards short, heart steady, senses alive, aware that she was no longer alone. Dominic emerged from the shadows without sound, not blocking her path, not reaching for her, simply existing within the same space. He stood at a respectful distance, posture relaxed, gaze steady, acknowledging without demanding. Emily turned to face him slowly, every instinct alive now, no longer suppressed but held carefully in check. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was deliberate, filled with recognition rather than threat. Dominic broke it first, his voice calm, measured, carrying no accusation. He did not name her. He did not claim her. He simply acknowledged the truth of the moment, that the forest was not the only thing she had been avoiding, that hiding had taken effort worth respecting. Emily listened, arms at her sides, breath even, resisting the urge to step back. She answered carefully, choosing words that protected her boundaries without denying what she was. She told him she had a life here. She told him she was not lost. Dominic accepted the response without argument, but his gaze did not waver. He told her quietly that being found did not erase choice, that fate did not demand surrender, only honesty. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. When he stepped back, giving her space, Emily felt the decision before she fully understood it. The hunt was no longer about discovery. It was about whether she would continue to run from something that had already caught her attention. As Dominic turned away, leaving the path open, Emily remained where she was, staring into the forest, realizing that the greatest danger she faced was not being claimed, but choosing to pretend she could remain unseen forever. The truth revealed itself not with chaos, but with clarity, arriving on a night so still that even Emily Carter could no longer pretend it was coincidence. The moon rose full and unhidden, its light pouring over North Hollow with quiet insistence, and Emily felt the change the moment it crested the trees. This was not pain or panic. It was recognition, deep and undeniable, as if something long restrained had finally reached the end of its patience. She stood in her apartment with the windows open, cool air brushing her skin, and understood with sudden calm that the effort it took to remain human had finally outweighed the safety it provided. The warmth beneath her skin spread slowly, no longer something to be forced down or ignored, but something asking to be acknowledged. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe without counting, without control, without denial, and in that instant the last barrier she had maintained slipped away. Across town, Dominic Blackwood stopped mid-step, every sense sharpening as the world answered a signal he had been waiting for. The air carried it clearly now, no longer muted or restrained, the unmistakable presence of an Omega who had stopped hiding. He did not rush. He moved with certainty, following the pull toward the forest edge where truth had always waited. Emily reached the clearing just as the moonlight flooded the ground, her heart steady, her posture unguarded for the first time in 10 years. When Dominic emerged from the trees, there was no surprise between them, only understanding. The distance she had maintained vanished without either of them stepping closer, erased by the clarity of what she was and what he had known all along. Emily met his gaze without flinching, her senses alive in a way that felt whole rather than overwhelming. The air around her shifted, carrying a presence she could no longer suppress, and Dominic acknowledged it with a slow nod, respect evident in his stillness. He did not reach for her. He did not speak immediately. He let the moment exist without demand. When he did speak, his voice was quiet, steady, free of judgment. He named what she was, not as a claim, but as a fact, honoring the strength it had taken to survive unseen. Emily listened, the weight of 10 years lifting as the truth settled into place. She admitted what she had hidden, not with shame, but with resolve, explaining why she chose a human life, why she believed disappearance was safer than belonging. Dominic did not argue. He understood choice when he heard it. He told her simply that hiding had not diminished her, but neither had it erased what fate had written. The bond had not been forced. It had waited. The realization settled between them like something inevitable but not cruel, a truth that did not demand surrender, only honesty. Emily felt the connection clearly now, not overwhelming, not consuming, but present, a quiet line drawn between two lives that had circled each other for years without meeting. She did not step back. She did not step forward. She stood exactly where she was, letting the night witness the moment she stopped pretending. Dominic inclined his head slightly, acknowledging not possession but recognition, understanding that this was the point where denial ended and choice truly began. The forest breathed around them, the town distant and unaware, and for the first time since she chose silence, Emily felt neither hunted nor hidden. She felt seen, fully and without illusion, knowing that the life she had protected for a decade had reached its turning point, and that nothing ahead would allow her to disappear again. The moment did not rush them, unfolding instead with a gravity that made every breath feel deliberate, as if the world itself understood that what came next could not be undone. Emily Carter stood beneath the moonlight, the clearing quiet enough that she could hear her own heartbeat, steady and resolute. Dominic Blackwood remained where he was, not advancing, not retreating, his presence a constant rather than a threat. The bond between them was no longer a question, but recognition did not erase choice, and Dominic respected that line without needing it spoken aloud. Emily broke the silence first, her voice calm despite the weight of the moment, asking what acknowledging the bond truly meant, asking what would change if she accepted what fate had been patient enough to wait for. Dominic answered without evasion, explaining that a bond was not ownership but connection, not erasure but belonging, something that could only exist if both sides allowed it to take shape. He told her plainly that marking was not a command but an invitation, one that carried permanence and responsibility. Emily listened, absorbing the words, understanding that the life she had protected through denial was already gone, replaced by clarity she could not unlearn. She looked toward the trees, toward the town lights barely visible in the distance, and felt neither regret nor fear, only the quiet truth that hiding had reached its natural end. When she turned back to Dominic, her decision was evident in her posture, her shoulders relaxed, her stance open, her gaze steady. She nodded once, not as surrender, but as consent grounded in choice. Dominic moved then, closing the distance with unhurried respect, stopping within arm's reach, close enough that Emily could feel the warmth of his presence without being overwhelmed by it. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. When his fingers brushed her wrist, the contact was gentle, grounding rather than possessive, and the bond responded like something waking from a long sleep. Emily felt it clearly, a warmth spreading through her chest, steady and reassuring, as if the connection had always known where it belonged. Dominic spoke her name quietly, not as a claim but as acknowledgement, and when he completed the marking, it was done with restraint and care, a symbolic sealing of intent rather than force. The air seemed to settle around them, the forest responding not with alarm but with acceptance, as if recognizing a balance restored. Emily inhaled deeply, surprised not by intensity but by calm, by the absence of fear she had expected and the presence of clarity instead. The bond settled into place without urgency, a constant thread rather than a consuming tide, and for the first time in 10 years, Emily felt entirely present within herself, not divided between who she was and who she pretended to be. Dominic stepped back, giving her space immediately, watching her with an expression that carried neither triumph nor dominance, only certainty and respect. He told her softly that the bond did not erase her choices or her past, that she would not be dragged from the life she had built without her consent. Emily believed him, not because of words, but because of the way he honored distance even now. She touched her wrist, feeling the faint echo of the connection, steady and real, and realized that the marking had not taken something from her. It had returned something she had set aside to survive. As the moon climbed higher, Emily stood between forest and town, no longer belonging to neither, but finally allowed to belong to herself, knowing that the path ahead would change her life, not through force or fear, but through a bond chosen in truth. Morning arrived softly, the kind of dawn that did not demand attention but offered it, pale light spreading across North Hollow, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. Emily Carter stood by her apartment window, watching the town wake up in familiar rhythms, cars passing, doors opening, ordinary life continuing without pause. The bond rested quietly within her now, not loud or consuming, but steady, a presence that felt less like something new and more like something returned. She moved through her space with calm purpose, packing only what mattered, touching objects she had lived beside for years without attachment, understanding that this place had been a shelter, not a destination. When she stepped outside, the air felt different, clearer, as if the weight she had carried for a decade had finally been set down. Dominic Blackwood waited near the edge of town, not intruding on her space, not summoning her, simply present in a way that acknowledged her autonomy. When Emily approached, there was no urgency between them, only recognition and choice. He asked nothing of her that morning. Instead, he offered clarity, explaining what lay beyond North Hollow, not in terms of command or expectation, but an invitation. He spoke of a world where she would not need to hide, where her strength would be recognized rather than restrained, where belonging did not require disappearance. Emily listened, her decision already forming not because she was pulled, but because she no longer needed to stay. She looked back once at the town that had kept her safe when she needed safety most, grateful rather than resentful, and then she turned forward, the bond steady, her steps unhesitant. The journey away from North Hollow was quiet, measured in miles that passed without resistance, the road opening ahead instead of narrowing. Emily felt the bond shift gently as distance grew, not tightening, but aligning, as if acknowledging that this movement was right. Dominic remained beside her without crowding, his presence protective without being possessive, offering space rather than control. As the town disappeared behind them, Emily realized she was not leaving as someone chased or taken, but as someone choosing a future she no longer feared. When they reached the boundary where forest met open land, Dominic stopped and turned to her, his expression serious but unguarded. He told her that the path ahead would not always be easy, that power carried responsibility, and that being seen meant being known. Emily met his gaze steadily, aware now that strength did not come from hiding or from domination, but from standing fully in what you were. She accepted the truth without illusion, knowing that she had survived 10 years by restraint and would live the next chapter by honesty. Dominic inclined his head in acknowledgement, a gesture of respect rather than authority, and extended his hand, not to lead, but to walk beside her. Emily took it without hesitation, feeling the bond respond with quiet certainty, not locking her into a role, but opening a door she was ready to step through. As the sun rose higher, casting long light across the road ahead, Emily understood that her life had not been erased by fate, but expanded by it. She was no longer an omega hiding in plain sight, nor a human pretending not to hear the call of her own nature. She was herself, fully and without apology, moving forward by choice rather than fear. The road stretched on, open and unclaimed, and as they walked together, Emily felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time, not relief or triumph, but belonging, earned and chosen, steady as the morning light that guided them forward.